Hello, my name's Robert Lomas, and I have been invited by the Combined Services Lodge of North Wales to give a talk to them about a random selection of military Freemasons. This talk was recorded on Friday the 28th of June in the Masonic Hall at Llanfairfechan. There is a long tradition of military lodges in Freemasonry from the earliest days. It's one of the oldest self-help organisations in the Western world, Freemasonry, and it was carried to North America and Europe by military lodges attached to various British regiments. There's not a lot of documentation regarding these early lodges, as the lodge's charter and minute books were kept and often lost by the regimental commanders. Often the lodge would be run as a tabletop lodge, and there's a special cloth used for that. There is an example of such a cloth. So if you had a camp table and you could spread your tablecloth over it, you could hold a table lodge there. And that's what they tended to do. Many of the officers of the regiment were members, often the men as well. And if they stayed in a town for any long period of time, they would initiate local men, so that when the regiment moved on, the civilian Masons would form an ad hoc lodge of their own, and in this way Freemasonry spread across North America and the colonies of the Empire. The Grand Lodge of Ireland issued the very first formal warrant for a travelling military lodge to the 1st British Foot Regiment in 1732. And it was soon followed by the Grand Lodge of Scotland and the 2 Grand Lodges of England, who also issued charters to military lodges. And by 1755, there was a total of 29 official travelling military lodges, as well as 3 naval lodges formed under the Grand Lodge of England. Now, many of the new European Grand Lodges also created military lodges, but they were linked to a fixed meeting place, so they didn't travel or meet overseas, and so they played little part in spreading Freemasonry around the world. But I'm sure you're familiar with Captain Elias Ashmold of the Royalist armies during the Civil War. He's often documented as being the first Freemason being made on English soil, because soon after he'd surrendered at Lichfield, he came up to Warrington and was made a Mason in the lodge of his brother-in-law, who happened to be a parliamentary colonel in Oliver Cromwell's army, Henry Mannering. Now, you've probably heard his much-quoted diary entry for October the 16th, 1646, when he said, "I was made a Mason at Warrington in Lancashire, with Colonel Henry Mannering of Carshalton in Cheshire." But I'm afraid he wasn't the first military Mason made on English soil. There was one before, and that was an initiation that took place in Newcastle, and it took place on a travelling warrant from the Lodge of Edinburgh, which had been issued to the Covenanters' army, which was currently occupying Newcastle. And it was a ceremony held to initiate Robert Murray, who was the Quartermaster General of the Scottish Covenanters' army, and they were occupying Newcastle. The worshipful master of that lodge was General Alexander Hamilton, and his senior warden was the army's master builder, John Milne. John Milne actually worked for Murray, who was Quartermaster General for that army. The minute of the initiation ceremony, which you can see up on the screen there, was returned to the Lodge of Edinburgh, which authorised the holding of travelling military lodges long before the establishment of any Grand Lodges. So Freemasonry is the oldest non-religious self-help organisation in the Western world. It began in the 1450s when 3 stonemasons who'd worked for an architect, who'd written books on how to use symbols and myths to change the way people think, got sacked. Luckily, these masons found new jobs working for Aberdeen Borough Council, and they were extending St Nicholas's Kirk. Now, at that time, there was no universal education, few people could read and write, and geometry was a trade secret of successful builders. And 2 important symbols of how to build imposing public structures were the set square, to make sure the walls were vertical and the corners square, and the compasses for measuring the sizes of the shaped stones to make sure they fitted into the wall. And we still use these implements as a badge of our interests. Freemasonry's study of symbols and truth led to many benefits for society. For example, Quartermaster Sir Robert Murray became the founding chairman of the Royal Society, which he set up to study the hidden mysteries of nature and science. And Freemason John Wallace, who was an early member of that, one of the first 10, was inspired to discover algebra and the power of equations after studying Masonic symbols. And he taught Isaac Newton how to use the symbolic tools of algebra to develop the calculus, which is the basis of all modern physics. And from this mathematical groundwork sprang the disciplines of navigation, gunnery, and avionics, which underpin the current technical capabilities of the armed services. An important object of Freemasonry is to encourage members, both male and female, to study technology. And it calls this by an old-fashioned term, studying the hidden mysteries of nature and science. Now, this has inspired many engineers over the centuries. Two outstanding non-military examples are Thomas Telford, on the left of that screen, who built roads and canals and founded the Institution of Civil Engineering, and George Stephenson, who never actually served in the army. He was called up to fight in the Napoleonic Wars and hired a mercenary for £25 to serve in his stead. He founded the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, built the first intercity railway between Liverpool and Manchester, and founded the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. But this philosophy has also inspired many armed forces personnel, and I want to briefly take you through the stories of a random selection of 6 of these Masons. I'll start with a couple of famous sailors, with Admiral Lord Nelson. Now, there's a bit of uncertainty about the date and place of initiation, but the most likely one seems that he was initiated in Amphibious Lodge 407 in Plymouth. But he also became a joining member of York Lodge 236. And if you ever get a chance to visit York Lodge in Dunkerley Place, on the wall they have framed a funeral cloth which was placed on his coffin during his state funeral, which you can clearly see shows him to be a studious fellow craft Freemason by the shape of the square and compasses. Now, he was certainly initiated prior to 1787, as he's recorded as taking part in a Masonic stone-laying ceremony alongside Most Worshipful Brother His Royal Highness Prince William, which took place in Plymouth. And he died a Mason, as the York Lodge has a Masonic mourning cloth that was used at his funeral. So let's move on to a more recent one who you might be familiar with. That's Brother the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who became a Master Mason in Navy Lodge. He graduated from the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth in 1940, became a midshipman on HMS Ramillies on escort duties in the Indian Ocean. He saw action on HMS Valiant during the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941, and he was mentioned in dispatches for his skillful use of searchlights. He was second in command of HMS Whelp when it took the formal Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay in 1945, and he then became captain of HMS Magpie, which was an anti-submarine frigate, and he held that post from 1950 to 1953, when he was promoted to Prince Consort and had to end his active naval career. He was initiated into Navy Lodge number 2612 on the 5th of December 1952 at the age of 31, passed to the second degree on the 6th of March 1953, and raised to the degree of a Master Mason on the 4th of May 1953. He remained a member of that lodge until his death, and sometimes attended totally unannounced, although he didn't have a lot of spare time. But interestingly enough, the Mason who initiated him was his father-in-law, Worshipful Brother His Majesty King George VI, who was a past master of Navy Lodge. He'd also served in the Navy, and he had served as a turret officer on HMS Collingwood during the Battle of Jutland. He was still Duke of York then, before he became king at the abdication. So we've looked at a couple of Navy Freemasons. Let's now have a look at a couple of military Freemasons of outstanding merit. Well, the first one is Brother Winston Churchill. He graduated from Sandhurst, at his third attempt, I might say, in 1894. And he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in 1895. He served in India from 1896 to 1898, when he took part in one of the last British cavalry charges in history at the Battle of Omdurman under brother General Kitchener. When he left the army, he became an MP. He joined Studholme Lodge 1591 in May 1901 and was raised to a Master Mason in 1902. If you ever get down to the Museum of Freemasonry in Great Queen Street, you can see Brother Winston's apron and his carrying case. He didn't progress up the Masonic hierarchy, but he remained a Mason for the rest of his life. He did become unattached towards the end, and his apron is preserved in UGLE's Museum of Freemasonry. So the next Army Mason I want to look at is somebody a little bit closer to home, and that's Worshipful Brother Johnson Bihari, VC. You can see him there, along with Dr. John, a past master of Penmamau Lodge, who is a friend of his and involved in supporting his charity. Now he's still a serving officer, not John, although Brother Johnson has been inclined to warn his comrades that the general's coming, but he's a general practitioner, not a general of the army. Brother Bihari joined the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment in 2001. He trained at Catterick as a warrior armoured personnel driver. He was actively deployed in Kosovo and Northern Ireland and Iraq, and that's where he won his VC. And he carried out 2 separate acts of sublime valour. One he got away scot-free with, the other one he wasn't so lucky. So on the 1st of May 2004, in El Amarish in Iraq, he was driving a warrior armoured vehicle on a mission to support a coalition outpost when his platoon was ambushed with rocket-propelled grenades and machine gun fire. His warrior was hit in multiple times, incapacitating its commander and gunner, putting its radio out of action and wounding many of the troops within it. But despite having no radio communication and under intense fire, Bihari took control of the situation, driving through the ambush to safety and saving the lives of the other soldiers. And he walked away from that scot-free, no injury. But just over a month later, his vehicle was again ambushed while leading a convoy. And this time, an RPG almost blew his head off. But despite massive injuries, he managed to drive the vehicle out of the ambush zone, preventing further casualties. He lost the sight in one eye, and a large part of his skull has been replaced by a titanium plate. He required major brain surgery and surgery on his other wounds to recover. And I'll just read you the citation from his VC. Private Bihari carried out 2 individual acts of great heroism, by which he saved the lives of his comrades. Both were in direct face of the enemy, under intense fire, at great personal risk to himself, one leading to him sustaining very serious injuries. His valour is worthy of the highest recognition. Now, despite his injuries, he stayed in the army. He's now a warrant officer, and he is still active in recruiting. But in 2006, he was initiated into Queensman's Lodge, number 2694, at Great Queen Street. And in 2024, he became Worshipful Master of Richard Clow's Lodge, 2926. And he also set up and runs a charity called the JBVC Foundation to offer young people involved in gang culture a fresh start and a chance to build a better life. So we've looked now at 2 outstanding Navy Masons. We've looked at 2 outstanding Army Masons. The first Mason I want to talk about connected to the RAF was not a member, but he was a major factor in winning the Battle of Britain, and that's Brother Reginald Joseph Mitchell. He played a major role in assisting the RAF to win the Battle of Britain, and it was long before he got his own pilot's licence. He was born in 1895 in Stoke-on-Trent, and that's 8 years before the first heavier-than-air flight by the Wright brothers, which started modern aviation. His father Herbert was the headmaster of the local school and a member of Jasper Masonic Lodge in Stoke. He was their founding organist. Now, throughout his school life, Reginald was encouraged in his interest in mathematics and engineering, and in 1911 he was apprenticed to Keir Stewart and Company to train as a mechanical engineer, building steam-powered railway tank engines. But during the First World War he became fascinated by the application of aircraft to military purposes. He was watching how they quickly developed from simple rangefinders for artillery into fighting machines in their own right. And when the Royal Flying Corps was founded in 1912, they mainly flew airships, but were developing both land and water-based aircraft. Now, Reginald foresaw the potential of what were then called flying boats. They had a big advantage. They didn't need either the construction or protection or maintenance of airfields in order to operate. They just needed a clear stretch of water. As soon as he completed his apprenticeship, he applied for a job at Supermarine Aviation to work on the AD flying boats, which there's an example on the screen. They were manufacturing these for the newly formed Air Department of the Admiralty. It would later become the Fleet Air Arm. And by 1920, after the end of the Great War, he was appointed chief designer for the company. And let's look a little bit at his Masonic career. On the evening of Friday the 13th, 1921, Reginald returned to visit Stoke, where his father, Brother Herbert, who had initially inspired his son with this love of mathematics and science, acted as junior warden as his son was initiated into Jasper Lodge. Now, becoming a Freemason enabled Reginald to learn more of the inspirational scientific philosophy of Freemasonry, which he had inherited from his father. He remained an active Freemason for the rest of his life, also joining the Lodge of Concord in Southampton in 1936. And over the next 16 years he designed and built 24 different types of flying machines, ranging from light aircraft and fighters to bombers and massive flying boats. But there's one particular iconic aircraft which I want to talk about this evening. His long-held interest in seaplanes was developed while he was building aircraft to complete in the Schneider Trophy. This was a regular series of speed trials with a prize of £1,000, and they were held in 1931. The series ended when Reginald's Supermarine S6B, which is shown on the screen, achieved a top speed of 407 miles an hour and won the trophy for the third consecutive year, and so was given it outright. But Brother Reginald's most permanent legacy is a different machine. It's the Supermarine Spitfire, which along with the Hawker Hurricane played a major part in helping the few win the Battle of Britain. This started life when the Air Ministry issued a procurement specification F7/30 for a new fighter to be armed with 4 machine guns. Mitchell's first submission was an inverted gull-wing design, which you can see on the screen, called the Type 224. It looked rather like a Stuka dive bomber, although it was designed before the Stuka. It had no flaps though, which gave it a very high landing speed, which was too high for a night fighter. It was a bit dangerous to bring in. However, in parallel with this plane, Reginald had also been working on a development of the S6B to create a fighter, and this was originally known as the Type 300 Spitfire. This went on to become the Supermarine Spitfire. At first it was intended to be a high-speed technology demonstrator to develop the design, but Reginald soon realised that this aircraft was suitable for production as a frontline fighter. The Air Ministry wrote specification F1035 around the Spitfire and reduced their normal requirements for fuel capacity and range to accommodate Reginald's Supermarine design. Then they paid for him to build the prototype. That prototype first flew on the 5th of March 1936. It was flown by RAF test pilot Mutt Summers, who said it handled beautifully. In tests it reached 349 miles per hour. Brother Mitchell had delivered the goods, and the RAF ordered 310 production Spitfires even before the prototype completed its official trials. In 1932, Reginald was awarded a CBE for his services to aviation, but a year later he was diagnosed with cancer. Despite his illness, he continued to work and even earned a private pilot's license in 1934. Sadly, he died in 1937. Now I want to talk about a serving officer who became a Mason from about the same period. I want to close this brief overview of military Freemason with a story of a little-known RAF hero who didn't join Freemasonry until he retired from active service, and he found his lodge to be a great source of support. I don't know how many airmen we have in this lodge, but they'll all be familiar with Operation Chastise, which was flown by 617 Squadron on the 16th of May 1943. For the Army and Navy types, it's usually known as the Dam Busters raid. In those days, before Google Earth, it wasn't easy to get photographs of the damage the strike had caused. The day after the raid, 542 Squadron, flying photo reconnaissance Spitfires out of RAF Benson, were tasked with photographing the damage. The flying officer assigned the job was Frank Frey, known to his mates as Jerry. His Spitfire was unarmed to make it as light as possible and to fit in extra fuel tanks to increase its range. His photo recon craft was painted light blue camouflage and fitted with a Rolls-Royce Griffin engine to fly high and fast to its target. With a top speed of 440 miles per hour and a ceiling of almost 43,000 feet, it was extremely difficult for the Luftwaffe to catch. Jerry Frey brought back detailed pictures of the success of the operation and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for that daylight mission into central Germany in an unarmed aircraft. And that's one of the photographs he took on that day. And there's the sort of plane he was flying in, a photo reconnaissance Spitfire, light, fast, and armed only with a camera. Now, after a successful post-war RAF career, Jerry retired in 1963, and he took up a job with the British Productivity Council in London. But he missed the comradeship of the mess. He was encouraged by friends to join Dedelius Lodge and was initiated in 1963. Dedelius 3843 is a special interest RAF Masonic Lodge, and it's the oldest RAF lodge in the world. It was set up by retired members of the newly created Royal Air Force in 1918. It was named after Dedelius, who was the first airman who made wings of feather and wax to escape from his imprisonment in Crete and flew to Sicily. It also took the name of the Dedelius training establishment at Cranwell, and its bylaws say that the qualifications for any member must be that they are an individual who has served in the Royal Air Service and have honourably retired. Brother Jerry fitted this specification exactly. Dedelius is only one of a number of special interest lodges which have been set up by retired members of the RAF, including the most recent RAF Lodge 7335 and other combined services lodges like this lodge here. There's Brother Jerry Frey, past master of Dedelius Lodge and Provincial Grand Sword Bearer of London Metropolitan. Now, as you brethren have realised, as you've reached the age of honourable retiring, you can miss the comradeship of the mess, but you can still enjoy the craft. Freemasonry has welcomed and celebrated many retired servicemen since the Boer War. When the veterans of World War I and World War II returned from battle, they swelled the ranks of the craft considerably. Freemasonry has many traditions which appeal to military men. A tradition of self-help in mastering basic skills. A tradition of self-restraint in personal behaviour. A tradition of self-improvement as a way of becoming a better contributor to society. And a sense of comradeship which comes with working with kindred spirits on a shared purpose. This is tradition at its best, passing hard-won knowledge from one generation to the next. It's a way for younger people to tap into the wisdom and experience of older people who've been interested and motivated enough to wrestle with the most fundamental questions of existence. Why are we here? What is the purpose of our life? And how can we become better people? So as I said at the start of this talk, Freemasonry is the oldest secular self-help organisation in the Western world. Its educational techniques have evolved to pass on its traditions, and its traditions benefit its members by making them better people, more at peace with themselves and the society they live in. It encourages them to become able and willing to take an active part in their communities, to create a better environment, and so enable them to learn more about themselves, their fellow lodge members and society as a whole. Brethren, let us not forget it was a travelling military lodge which first brought Freemasonry down to England, before any other such lodges, to spread its message of brotherly love, relief and truth throughout the world. So as a peripatetic and combined service lodge, you, my brethren, represent one of the oldest traditions of our craft, and I wish you well. Thank you for listening. My name's Robert Lomas, and this talk was given live at the Friday the 28th of June 2025 meeting of the Combined Services Lodge of North Wales meeting in Llanfairfechan.